My name is Judith. I'm a director at East. I'm a research fellow of the Architecture Foundation. This is the second tree talk. You can't hear me? Okay. I've got a microphone here, which should be working. Better now? Yeah. So my name is Judith. I'm a director at East and a research fellow at the Architecture Foundation. This is the second of the tree talks that we're doing. The first one was sort of deliberately wide and open and like a beginner's course, so you're in the slightly advanced group tonight. So thanks very much to Rattle, who've been playing the opening, Teresa Wrigley and Catherine Brown. And the slides that you saw were from a residency that the Alternative School of Economics had in 2018 at Phytology, a nature reserve in Bethnal Green, and Ruth will speak about that a little bit later. I'm co-moderating tonight with Jack Self, who's the perfect person to do this with because he's got a degree in microeconomics and he's also worked as a landscape architect. And he's an editor of Real Review and a director of Real, and he's sort of coined or is trying to proliferate the term form follows finance. And we've got three speakers from Europe before a break. And then after the break, we'll have another three speakers from London, and then a little discussion with everybody together. And because we got the speakers from Europe, we kindly had generous funding from Hub Brussels and the diplomatic representation of Flanders, which Bas met today, and the Embassy of Switzerland as well for Robin. And so the first speaker will be Bas, who joins us from Brussels. And we thought that was interesting because arguably there's no such thing as landscape in Belgium. Bas speaks about how the tradition of landscape comes from the tradition of painting, and how the making of reality is influenced by art, not the other way around. And he's talking about how he's sort of trying to augment landscapes in his projects. And he's doing projects at all kinds of scale. There's a tiny one that he's maybe showing in London, which is Sunk Courtyard, where he's playing with microclimate, and there's a very large one, like a competition win around Notre Dame in Paris, or the wetland parks in Arles, where he says they're trying to measure the success of the park more in migratory birds nesting than visitor numbers. So yeah, off you go, Bas.
Thank you.
We'll sit here.
Can you hear me?
Here.
I'm supposed to do something here. Do you know how this works? I know PDF, but it doesn't. Acrobat should be like this. Okay. You can hear me all right?
Yeah. Yes. Looks good.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be in such a beautiful venue. Mostly we're in kind of a room somewhere, not in a concert hall. And I'm very happy to present you three projects very briefly. One that's 40 square meters, one that's 4,000 square meters, and one that is 40,000 square meters. But before I start, I'd like to show this image of Alexander von Humboldt. When he went to explore the Americas, he tried to understand how things work, and he made these beautiful maps that really compress all the knowledge that he derived from, or he distilled from a place, which can be humidity, can be altitude, can be temperature, even the blueness of the sky he was interested in. And you could see all these measurements written on either side of this beautiful drawing, really trying to understand how nature works as a complex. And we looked into his drawings that are in Berlin, and I love how he produces a certain type of knowledge, how he produces representation through drawing. And we call this a designerly way of thinking through design, and by making this cartography, having a different knowledge of a site. And of course, he does that with natural settings that he explored. When we try to be inspired by this, we look at built environments in which we work, built environments in which we try to understand the relationship between elements, to try to understand how a climatic condition has been made by man and how we can intervene in it. And we've been lucky to experiment this in Europe, but also all over the world in different types of climates. And it's really this idea that the city is a man-made environment. It changes the wind patterns, it changes solar exposure, it changes the permeability of the soil. It does produce a microclimatic or a myriad of microclimates within a city, and understanding that microclimate can help you to know what needs to be done, because we will compare such a microclimate with a similar natural situation, understand how that natural situation works, and try to bring that logic into the artificial climate, which is a city. So I'll show you this with these three projects. The first one is in London. It's not the Sunken Garden, but it's a similar garden, but a public one for a hotel not so far from here, the Mandrake Hotel. And I was called on site when the works had already begun. The architect Manolo and White had started to convert a former office building into this hotel. And I was called by the owner. As you can see here, the scaffolding was up. There are these walkways around the rooms. And he wanted the tree of life. He wanted the biggest tree possible in the middle of the courtyard, which I didn't think was a good idea, because I was afraid that if you would center all the attention to the middle, you would lose the space. And so that was one. And second, this tree was supposed to come on top of a restaurant, which of course we would never have the load necessary to hold that tree. And so we convinced him convinced him, it took some time, but we tried to explore how we could make a very different experience using the walkways that were that you've seen in construction, using those walkways to create plant medium and using climbers to create a kind of a green room rather than a central tree. So in a sense, the opposite of what he had in mind. We worked very tightly with Manolo and White, and here you can see the sections where I was, of course, trying to get more plant medium. They were trying to get less for weight reasons. But so in this section, the whole project is conceived from the drainage to the plant medium to the lighting fixture that's right here to the railing, everything in one section that we then built. Here you see these planters that run around the walkways. As you can see here, it runs around the whole courtyard. It's used to fix the railings and then used to plant 500 climbers. We tested different species during a construction site to know which one would respond the best to this little microclimate. It is a microclimate because it's protected from the wind, but also since you have a restaurant on the lower level with heaters, but also a restaurant on this level, of course you have a heated interior or outdoor room. 500 climbers that create shade. When you come out of your room, you have this green light filtered from these plants, but you also have the odor, you also have the flowers, solanum in this case, passion fruit, even real passion fruits grew in the garden that they used then in the cocktail bar. And here you see this experience of entering. This is in Fitzrovia. You enter this building, and suddenly you are in this very strange courtyard with these climbers going up 3 levels, as you can see here. From this experience in London, we go to Paris, 4,000 square meters. Again, a very artificial environment. We're in La Défense. And we are right here on top of this urban boulevard where a developer found a way of putting 1,000 mini foundations to build a bridge structure on which then he built a skyscraper. And they had asked me to come up with a landscape for this 4,000 square meter of floating structure. And I was really thinking, like, what is this area? I mean, you have all these skyscrapers, all this glass, all this stone, the wind, and I thought it's very similar in the end to the Alps. The skyscrapers, the glass reflections remind you of glaciers. The stony environment is perfectly what you see on this picture. And I thought the one thing that produces a climate in the Alps or any other mountain is, of course, the tree line, because you know very well when you're underneath the tree line, you're protected from the wind and from the sun. The moment you leave the tree line, you're there with the elements. And I thought, can we not produce a tree line in La Défense? And can we not think of La Défense as a kind of transposition of a mountain logic? And so we tried to plant as many trees as possible on this bridge structure. The promoter or developer had made a deal with the city and had told me, like, you have to plant 9 trees. The building permit defines 9 trees, don't plant less. And so what we did is we did a reading of the structures as if trying to understand the limitation of a structure as a limitation of nature. For example, you cannot plant on the beams because you cannot put the root balls. You cannot plant on the accessibility lines. You cannot plant on the fire truck lanes. And so we made this map of non-plantable zones and planted everywhere else. So we planted 50 trees instead of 9. And here we used computer programs to divide the trees in the best way possible, taking into account the cubic meters of planting soil that we had. We negotiated for 2 years with the structural engineer, again, this time not to make the planter wider, but to make it deeper. And we ended with 53 centimeters. Every centimeter was hard fought. 53 centimeters is about this height. But we deploy it on 4,000 square meters, which gives us 2,000 cubic meters. And in the end, what counts for a tree is volume. It will go where it can go. And so here you see at scale the thin layer of livable or of a root medium. You see it here. That is continuous. It was a big fight to not have it compartmented. It's continuous, so the roots can really go everywhere. And on top of these beams, as you can see here, we put granite slabs that do not compress the earth. Open joints, so all the rainwater goes to those 2,000 cubic meters of plant medium, and then trees pop out with these little openings, as you can see here. But the whole structure is totally permeable for rainwater that is stored underneath the planting medium. And what I like here is that you get a similar quality like you would have in the mountains. There's only stone and trees. And all the details like gutters, like manholes are all, well, we design them away so you don't see them. So these trees have been planted 5 years ago, and we'll give it 2-3 years more, create this continuous canopy as you start seeing here. From 4,000 square meters, we go more south to Arles, the south of France, 40,000 square meters. Every time a bit more difficult, the exercise. Here we're on a former industrial wasteland that the Luma Foundation wanted to transform into a site for the production and the exhibition of arts. And Annabel Zeldorf was hired to renovate the existing industrial buildings, Frank Gehry to make a new centerpiece tower, and myself to make a public park on this site. A public park on a site that has a climatic condition of a semi-desert. Heating up in the sun so that when it would be opened yearly for the Rencontre de la Photographie, you would be trapped between the solar energy from the sun and the radiation from this concrete platform that had been carved out of the rock, so no soil, no water, no plants whatsoever. And so we thought, before we can make a park, we have to change the climate. So how can we change the climatic condition of these 4 hectare or 40,000 square meter artificial horizontal platform? And we thought, how can we look at the big landscapes around the south of Arles? Because Arles is really at the crossroads of the southern branch of the Alps, called the Alpilles, the Camargue, which is the estuary plain of the Rhone, going into the Mediterranean, and then this strange kind of former riverbed of a glacier called La Crau. And we thought we have all the plant logics from the mineral situation of the Alpi to the wet situation of the Camargue. All the strategies plants have developed are here. Can we use them to make this new autonomous nature on the site? And we thought, what would happen over 200, 300, 400 years? How would nature come back, and how can we accelerate those natural processes? That was really the hypothesis. So we looked at the wind, and we imagined that the wind would come. It's a Mistral wind coming from the north, so coming from the glaciers in Switzerland, following the Rhone, coming to the side, creating over time a topography with sediments. Topography creates different environments. Different environments attract different types of plants. And so in the end, we did this cut and fill proposal where this new topography is really sculpted by the wind. And then it produces an interesting asymmetrical section, because when you would be in summer, you want to be in the shade of the trees and you have the wind as a refreshment, while in winter you want to be in the sun and you want to have the winds blocked by this topography. So we deployed this topography over the whole side, and then we looked at the depth of earth that we added. And so when we add only 30 centimeters, we use pioneer plants, and with every step we do a next step in the ecological succession. So the moment you arrive at your little hill that builds up to 1.5 meters, and the highest point is 3.5 meters, when you walk next to that little mound, you go faster into the future. Because the moment you arrive here, you are 300 years further than when you're there. And so it's a very interesting space-time relationship where the type of plant would tell you how much time had evolved. So this, I won't go into detail, but so it's a full bioclimatic section with the water being pumped from an adjacent canal, being filtered by the plants and then used for irrigation. And then we worked with the Transolar for measuring the Universal Thermal Climate Index, or the perceived temperature. And for example, here in this semi-desert condition, I'm going to show this here, only 13% of comfortable time was measured, while going from this to this, you see the pond, you see the plants, you actually see the evaporation happening right there. We go to 65% measured comfortable hours of outer comfort, and if there's a little breeze, even to 77%. So from 13 to 77 through the plantation of 80,000 plants and the transformation of this former wasteland into this new park. Show you some more pictures where you can even see the wet vegetation with the willows, the alder, the poplars, and in the background you see the more dry vegetation of these pine trees that you would find in the Alpi. So really a compression of those landscapes on the side and an acceleration of natural processes in time. The park was opened summer 2021, so this summer is the second year of development. And so all the vegetation you see here, these 80,000 plants from 140 species, have been planted in a time frame of about 1 year. An art piece by Carsten Huller that produces this fragmented landscape. You see it here as well. We added botanical tags. Eliane made them. She's here in the audience, so that schools could come and really learn about these plants that we've planted in the park. And so I end with this image where you see the park that now has become the largest public park of the city of Arles, and that has become hugely successful. But from the beginning, and as Judith mentioned, I told Maya Hoffman of the Luma Foundation, we won't measure the success of the park by the number of visitors. We will measure it by the number of migrating birds that would land. And we just received the first report of a scientific center following its development. And last week we received it. 37 new species were spotted. So in function of those species, we're adding new bird nests. to really augment not only the number of species of plants, but also of animals to come to the park. I would like to end with a little video of 1 minute that resumes this approach, where we try to think urbanism as this interface between an uncertain meteorology, a dangerous meteorology, and an not well understood geology. And so the idea is, of course, a tree does that very well. It goes into the earth and it goes upwards to the sky. The idea is, can we rethink our urbanism as this interface? Can we rethink urbanism as this permeable layer between what's above and what's below? Thank you.
We have one question.
Yeah, we'll just do one very quick question. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I just have one question, which is, you're designing in some sense for non-human clients, and you were also talking about the time periods that were involved in these different projects. And one of the things that I find very difficult with talking about landscape with clients as opposed to architecture, which is, let's say, finished in a single moment, is the role that time plays in the project. So my question is, do you find it hard to talk to clients about a 400-year lifespan, about multi-year lifespan, and are clients receptive to this idea of time?
They are, but you need to explain it. So I also tell them, we don't make an object. We make it, because sometimes they ask me, when is it finished for you? Never. The worst moment is when it starts. When we're finished, it's the worst moment. It only gets better from there on, and it has ups and downs. But the idea is, as for example in Arles, is to make a living organism that's almost autonomous, that allows us to visit it. For example, in Arles, only 5,000 square meters are for human use. All the rest is really plant life and animal life. But so when we speak to the client, we tell them that this factor of time is really important in the project. Even if we compress natural processes, we design for the coming 50 to 100 years.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have come on. So we have Robin coming next, and Robin joins us from Zurich, where she has her own practice. So she's a landscape architect and an urban designer, and she also had an artist residency at the Stuttgart Academy of Art. She's a co-founder of Studio Vulkan, and where she was leading a project around the Zurich airport, which is really interesting, and also the Museum of Natural History Park in St. Gallen. And she talks about the idea of geographical re-enchantment. And her projects are sort of mostly on the periphery of Swiss cities, where three elements are coming together. There's sort of a distaste for high-rise buildings, there's a need to densify, and then there's these forest fragments that are found. And that's what she's working with, and I think she'll tell us about a bit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin.
Is this working? Yes. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. The competition for the woodlands continues, especially in urban and suburban space. The existing forest laws, however, aren't set up for dealing with them. I'm going to begin exactly here on the periphery in the suburban space, where most of the development happens in most cities, where most people are living, much more than in the inner city, and where most of my projects take place. And the city of Zurich, we've been asked to research this, so I was researching this with people from the city, understanding what they're doing, and they are working very hard to make new policies about the green, and they're very focused on large tree crowns, protecting the existing large tree crowns, and having 1% of the parcels open for new trees to grow quite big. And they have 7 categories for the urban situation. And I said, well, so what are you doing on the periphery? And they have one category called city edge, which is just where the buildings meet the trees and the agricultural land. And I thought, well, I said to the director of the Parks Department, well, that's odd. It's like where most things are happening. Why aren't you working there? And what's interesting is that these residual spaces, these are abandoned sort of leftover trees, residual trees, they have enormous potential, both in a psychological aspect, and a climatic aspect, and a biodiversity aspect. So actually, in chatting to the director of the Department of Parks, he quickly asked me if I'd go to lunch and brainstorm with him about a strategy for the city of Zurich to work on these edges. So it's actually something that's in process, and the cities aren't paying attention, and these are very, very valuable places that we're losing if we don't do something. So for suburban trees, extreme legal and physical constraints are pitted against the enormous qualities they afford us: dreamy and exhilarating, archaic and fresh, temporal and timeless. Little money and effort are needed to requalify the recreational, ecological, and climatic contributions, which can also be monetized. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to talk about a brief introduction about my work, which I call In Search of Geographical Re-enchantment. What that means to me, it's mostly work on the periphery of the cities, which are pretty tough places to work. And as you see in the triptych in the back of the image, we're going from having rich and site-specific places to having standardized, soulless, and very generic places. And that's true for the cities, and it's true for the landscape, and it's true for the periphery. And that's something that I think we should be extremely worried about, but it doesn't seem that very many people are speaking about it at all. It's both a global and a Swiss phenomenon. The Swiss is full of this sprawl. It's very acute problem. As I was a student, I bumped into this quote from Le Corbusier: "The purpose of architecture is to move us." And I thought, well, if that's the case, then it would be the case for cities, and it would be the case for landscape. But it's much harder for us to do it because architects have a lot more control over the buildings and the relation to the outside world. So I've spent quite some years looking at possible ways to do that, to make spaces that have the ability to go under our skin. And I'm going to show you some of these ways, and I'll briefly show 3 projects. This is from a recent book called The Invention of Nature, which is about, in fact, von Humboldt. For scientists like von Humboldt, who was trying to understand nature, the dualism between the external and internal world was the most important question. Humans were like citizens of 2 worlds, occupying both. So I came to understand that actually we're missing maybe a component when we talk about landscape altogether and trees. There's a famous theoretician, John Dixon Hunt, who talks about the 3 natures. The first nature being the natural level, the power of natural materials. The second, the cultural nature. That's what mankind does with nature. And the third for him is the garden, which has an aesthetic rather than a functional use. But for me, I thought we need to have a 3rd layer be the imagination, because actually all landscapes and all trees and all we do are the dialogue between this inner and outer world. So in my world, there is always a layer of imagination in any confrontation of landscape. I also went to the atmospheric group. I follow them very closely, Johanni Palasma, Zumthor, etc. And in a